copy of my testimony to the governor of this great state, Governor Ed Randell, his honorable cabinet, to the lieutenant governor and president pro tempore of your Senate, Joseph Scarnati, and to the leader of this great House, Speaker Keith McCall, and to the chair of this Judiciary Committee, Representative County Jerome, and to you, the elected representatives of the people of this state, I extend my most sincere gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to speak before you this morning. As stated, my name is Jeremy Collins. I'm the director of the North Carolina Coalition for a Moratorium, a partnership of organizations and individuals across the state that supports reforms to the North Carolina capital punishment process. Capital punishment system. The campaign's membership includes Democrats and Republicans, attorneys, politicians, faith leaders, and communities from a variety of denominations and nonprofit organizations whose missions are dedicated to criminal justice reform, victims' rights, and restorative justice. I am honored to appear before you today on behalf of our 25 state coalition partners and the great state of North Carolina. This morning, I am here to speak briefly about a bill currently before this body that would address the issue of racial bias in Pennsylvania's capital punishment procedure. Racial bias has and continues to play an inappropriate role in capital sentencing in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, and across the United States. I am proud to share that last year, North Carolina took the brave step of enacting the North Carolina Racial Justice Act. This bill, just as your House Bill 1996, provides that no person shall be sentenced to death or executed pursuant to any judgment based on race. It would be an understatement to say that passage of this legislation was not an easy task in North Carolina. Our bill sponsors, other supportive legislators, and civic and religious leaders, black and white, worked tirelessly to promote the principle that fairness to all persons, regardless of race, is essential to our capital punishment process and our criminal justice system at large. I would love to tell you how we passed the Racial Justice Act in North Carolina and the rough road we traversed. It's a wonderful story, and I never tire of sharing it. But today, I would rather spend my time talking to you about the amazing things we've seen in North Carolina since passing this act. For the first time, the state has established an enforceable compact with its citizens that no person will be executed if it can be shown that there is a significant risk that race was a factor on the part of the justice system when deciding whether persons live or die. This act gives North Carolina citizens generally, and its minority citizens in particular, greater confidence that the death penalty will not be meted out in North Carolina in an arbitrary or discriminatory fashion. By its willingness to engage in self-examination about past racial discrimination and future procedural protections, North Carolina has established itself as a leader in fairness and justice. Additionally, by examining the practices of excluding certain minorities from juries, the Racial Justice Act will help weed out state-sponsored discrimination in jury selection, and as a result, lead to more diverse juries across the criminal justice system. The Racial Justice Act sends an official message that racial discrimination, wherever it is found, will not be tolerated by the state. In short, we passed this bill in North Carolina because we were willing to recognize and address a glaring problem in North Carolina. I would submit to you that our shared official state drink of milk is not the only thing our two states have in common. In North Carolina, the Darrell Hunt case became a symbol of a breakdown in the court system for people of color. That symbol became much worse in 2008 with the exoneration of 3 African-American men from North Carolina's death row, Levon Jones, Jonathan Hoffman, and Glenn Edward Chapman. Both Pennsylvania and North Carolina share a history of prosecutors using peremptory challenges to exclude African Americans from capital jury service. In North Carolina, African Americans are routinely excluded from capital juries, resulting in many of the men and women living on North Carolina's death row being sentenced to death by all-white juries. In North Carolina, a 1996 study of race and the death penalty found that African Americans are 3.5 times more likely to receive a death sentence for the murder of a white person. Similarly, Philadelphia was the only of 2 jurisdictions in the country, the other being Houston, Texas, where statisticians found an actual correlation between the race of defendant and the imposition of the death penalty in recent times. North Carolina and Pennsylvania have a history of leading the nation in criminal justice reform to make the system better, fairer, and more just. The Pennsylvania rule is known to all students of criminal law as the first attempt to narrow the class of cases for which death was an eligible punishment. The Pennsylvania Prison Society was the first public education and advocacy group in America to focus on more humane conditions of punishment. Our comparisons put aside, perhaps the most compelling reason for you to pass this bill has to do with the decision the Supreme Court of the United States made about 23 years ago. While the McCleskey decision of 1987 acknowledged the problem of race bias in capital sentencing, the court said addressing the problem would force them to deal with the unmanageable problem of racial bias in the entire criminal justice system. Instead, they found that while Mr. McCleskey's showing of racial bias in Georgia was compelling, state legislatures were the appropriate bodies to remedy such injustices. House Bill 1996 is Pennsylvania's response to the court's charge in addressing racial bias in capital sentencing. This reform will empower the state courts to determine, based on facts, whether or not race was a significant factor in the decisions to seek or impose a death sentence. I will not stand before you and sit before you and suggest that the process of enacting this important piece of legislation was simple. There were those in North Carolina who, despite their acknowledgement of racial bias in the capital punishment process, chose political popularity over the politics of justice and fairness. I will concede that many of your colleagues will do the same. Some prosecutors in North Carolina warned legislators that the Racial Justice Act would end the death penalty in North Carolina, but it has had no such effect. In fact, there have been an equal number of capital prosecutions in North Carolina over the past 2 years. And additionally, there were 2 death sentences in 2009 compared to 2 death sentences already in 2010. In light of the abundant evidence documenting this issue, I hope and pray that this body will refuse to succumb to the rhetoric of division and fear and choose to acknowledge and address this problem. For the judicial system to work most effectively, all people in the state have to feel and believe that it is available to them and working for them. In North Carolina, there was a growing feeling, particularly among people of color, that the judicial system did not work for them. A justice system that serves only some well is not justice. It is, in fact, injustice. I charge you to do justice. I offer to you every resource at my disposal to help you pass this bill. The Racial Justice Act rejects the notion that we can rely on human beings to be impartial and that we are incapable of policing ourselves. I submit to you that passing the Racial Justice Act is a simple step that strengthens what we all hope for, the world we live in, and the respective state we love. It ensures that justice works for everyone. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions about North Carolina. I noticed there was a number of procedural questions asked earlier about what it would mean to have a Racial Justice Act. I can also speak to Indigent Defense Service. We have an Indigent Defense Service in North Carolina that's been fully funded since 2001, but I'm happy to answer any questions.